Jungle is widely regarded as the most impactful role in the game, but Riot hasn't really been able to rein it in or change it without suffering other negative consequences. So in the last video, we talked about Freak saying 1 year ago that Jungle was the most impactful role in the game and that it was probably 20% or 15% stronger than other roles. Now, I'm actually somebody who believes that some roles should be able to have an outsized impact on the outcome of games, and maybe that should be jungle. Now, as an old school player, I don't really believe it should be jungle. I think support and jungle should have a lower impact on the game. But I think the reality is that League as a game has evolved and changed, and what we understand now about the game is that if you had to boil down what one statistic is that shows what roles have the most impact on the game, it's kill participation. And let's break that down further by saying that it's important kill participation. So for example, when a Lulu throws her shield on somebody, that's not as an important assist as a jungler enabling a play to happen that otherwise just wouldn't have been facilitated or happened at all. And so I think that in general, we can agree that a lot of times, when kills are happening in League and advantages are being created, it's usually because of a numbers advantage, especially when we're playing a simple, straightforward game in solo queue where, complex coordination is just not occurring. And so all that matters is, do we have numbers? Do we have numbers? Do we have numbers? The roles that get to dictate who has numbers where is support and jungle, because they're the only roles that can move around the map. So because of this, over the years, as people have gotten more efficient at clearing the jungle, figured out how to build better items and stuff like that, as the role has also become more powerful, as camps have dealt less damage and things like that, jungle has become this extremely important role in the game that really dictates how everyone in the game has to play and how the outcome of a lot of games go. Now, according to Riot, they think that each role, especially in more of a solo queue environment, should have an equal ability to impact the outcome of the game. Otherwise, climbing just isn't fair. It's role-based, and that would be a bit unfortunate. And obviously, we see that in solo queue with a lot of challenger players being junglers and a disproportionate number of junglers being able to get to challenger and dominate in solo queue. That being said, I'm not necessarily saying that jungle should be as weak as other roles. What I really want to do instead, or that there's a great solution, is talk about the problem with nerfing jungle, which is that when you move the needle one direction or another, you just wind up back in the same place, which is junglers ganking more often. So let's start with a bunch of different changes that we could make to jungle and just kind of think about what would happen if we did them. And many of these we already know because they've been tried over the years. So the easiest thing to think of when you're thinking about jungle is, well, we could speed up clear speeds or we could slow down clear speeds as a lever. The issue with this is that if we speed up clear speeds while leaving the rewards the same, that means junglers are just going to clear all their camps faster and have even more time after their first clear, or especially after their second clear, because there's only 4 camps on the second clear since the buffs are down. They would have even more time to gank and impact the map between their camps, and so it doesn't really make sense to speed up their clear if our goal is to reduce the amount of ganks and therefore the amount of impact that junglers are having on laners and their game, especially in the early game. So obviously we don't want to speed up their clear. Well, you would think, okay, obviously we slow down their clear then. The problem with this is actually if you slow down junglers' clears too much, then they'll actually return to a gank meta where certain champions get picked in jungle that can afford to be lower economy, do a 3 camp or a 4 camp into a gank, and then they'll just do a 3 or 4 camp into a gank, skip a couple of camps, they're getting less farm, but they're actually ganking more. And if you ask laners what they really want in terms of reducing the impact of jungle, I think laners just want to be able to play out their lane without getting impacted so heavily by a gank, especially a very early gank, that makes their lane unwinnable from the very beginning, kind of regardless of a lot of agency that they have. So it takes agency away from laners. So are there ways to play around jungle? Absolutely, right? Like laners, obviously, especially at certain ranks, are just not respectful of where the enemy jungler can be and just fighting their lane constantly as if the jungle role doesn't exist. And so they're allowing jungle to have more impact than it should. But there's no doubt that jungle is the most impactful role in the game because they are able to get to all of these situations, pretty efficiently. And they're able to do something that they weren't able to do in the past, which is they're able to full clear and get a free gank and then start their clear again. Whereas really, ideally, you'd like jungle to be able to choose between full clearing and then having to recall, or doing a couple of camps, like a 3 camp or a 4 camp, and then getting a gank off. Problem is that junglers don't have to make this choice anymore because they're too healthy and their camps don't do any damage, and people have gotten more and more efficient over the years at clearing, and so their clear speeds are really, really high. But again, if you just nerf the clear speeds, what's going to happen? If you make the clear speed slower, they're just going to return to ganking junglers, do 3 or 4 camps, and then gank you anyways. So it's not really going to change much for you if your jungler is slightly slower at doing a camp or two. And in fact, if they play more early game centric gank heavy junglers, a lot of laners would prefer that meta in jungle worse than the meta that we're experiencing now. Now, another issue is that laners don't really like full clear junglers either. So they don't like junglers that are just sitting there farming their lane, or farming their camps, and they don't like junglers who are ganking all the time. Because the reality is that what laners want to a certain extent is unreasonable. What laners really want is their jungler to gank them all the time, and the enemy jungler to not be able to gank. Well, obviously, you can't achieve this because the role is just going to be balanced evenly between both teams, so this is never going to happen. But laners will hate a jungler who is stuck in the jungle AFK farming, and they'll hate a jungler who is spam ganking unless it's their jungler spam ganking. So that's kind of the issue. So for example, Tyler1's kind of joke suggestion that we put up a wall around jungle for the first 10 minutes of the game would obviously just result in the opposite of making the camps tankier, which is that you would see farming junglers only, scaling junglers only, who would never be able to help their laners or impact the game in any way at all. Laners would be completely left to their own devices, and so junglers that have, more tanky junglers, CC heavy junglers, early game gankers and things like that would be much less viable, because all of a sudden they'd be relegated to farming their jungle and scaling for a really long time, which is obviously going to benefit, those scaling full clear farm junglers more than it would others. And so people will return to those champions and just farm the jungle and have no impact. So you can't just put up a wall. You can't just make the clear speeds faster, and you can't just make the clear speeds slower. So now we have to start to think about some other levers that Riot could pull that are more complicated or outside of the box solutions. So let's say, for example, that you make, well, what about back in the day when the camps did so much damage that junglers had to choose between full clearing and doing 3 or 4 camps and ganking? Well, the problem with that is it's not really any different than the camps being too slow to take, right? Which is whether they're too slow to take, and so the resource that they're wasting is time, or the resource that they're wasting is health, which wastes time through you having to recall. Ultimately, the goal or the result is the same, which is that junglers are going to have to play around that by probably picking more early-centric gank-heavy junglers. And so unfortunately, the reality is that if you make the camps do too much damage, just like if you make the camps take too long to take, junglers are just going to gank more, which is not what laners want. So that doesn't solve the problem either. Now, other people have suggested that other games like Dota, for example, have way more camps, and that could somehow create some trade-offs between ganking and farming. The issue I see with this is that I don't really think that adding more camps to the game does anything other than increase the amount of time it takes to clear all of your camps. It's not really much different than if you increase the HP again to slow down the clear on junglers. So for example, imagine that you added 2 new camps to the game, so instead of 6 there were 8. The reality is that if you added those 2 extra camps on the side, junglers would still need to be rewarded the same amount of gold and XP, because if you gave them more gold and XP, then instead of having to go for a gank to find anything, they could just efficiently full clear for even longer and get even more gold and XP compared to laners, and that would make jungle even stronger. So you can't just give them more gold and XP by adding more camps. You would have to reduce the gold and XP that they're getting from all of the current camps in order to make sure that they're getting the same resources just slower. Well, if they're getting the same resources just slower, it's literally the same thing as just giving blue and red buff and all the other camps more HP. So it's just the same thing as increasing the camp's HP. It's just you're dividing that HP into some new camps instead of keeping it on the current camps. You'd also obviously have to go through a process of working on making some slight changes to the map to allow for new jungle camp pits. There's not necessarily a ton of room to do that, but obviously you could do something like that. So I think from a design perspective, it's one of the harder things to accomplish as well, because it's not just numbers the balance team could change over a week or two. It would be a major change to the game. So even with some of these creative solutions like increasing the amount of damage or adding extra camps and things like that, it doesn't really seem to do a whole lot. People have also suggested that you add these extra camps and make it easier for laners to do them for some reason, and that should somehow decrease the power of jungle. I don't really see how that would decrease the impact jungle would have. Let's say that you had, again, an extra 2 camps on each side, 8 camps, and those 2 camps on the very edge were kind of, tucked near the lanes or something like that, and the laners were able to do them without the damage reduction that they have against camps currently. This would really not slow down jungle at all, because again, jungle would just be clearing the same 6 camps for the same amount of gold and XP in the same exact amount of time. So I don't really see how it would impact their ability to gank or not gank by adding these extra camps for laners. And then if anything, what it would do for laners is when laners are losing lane and not doing very well, they're going to get rewarded by when they have to walk off of turret because they're worried about getting dove, or when they just, their lane's getting frozen on them and they can't really do anything about it. Laners are going to get punished less for those mistakes that they've made because there's now a camp available for them to take for free. And I just don't really think that kind of thing being in the game for struggling laners makes sense as a way to reward them for being behind. So I don't really see how that would change jungle either. So at the end of the day, there are some other things, like obviously junglers have a huge amount of control over neutral objectives through smite securing them. And obviously those neutral objectives do determine quite a bit of how the game is won or lost. So you could take away some power from those neutral objectives. And to be fair to Riot, with the start of this split 2 here, the Ionia split, we've actually seen some of that, right? They've reduced the Void Grub spawns from 2 to 1, and they've reduced the power overall of Void Grubs, and they've also reduced the power of Rift Herald. So I think that overall, the power level of neutral objectives has gone down a little bit, especially in the early game, and I think that that's a good change. But yeah, you could definitely do a lot to reduce the impact that junglers could have through neutral objectives. Because obviously when a jungler gets picked and dies or whatnot, that can have, severe negative impact on a neutral objective compared to even someone else getting picked in a lot of cases. So one way that you could take power away is through that. You could nerf the champions directly, but that's a really long, complicated process because you'd have to make individualized targeted nerfs at some 60 different champions or something like that, who are also going to be played in other roles in mid lane and support and top lane and stuff like that. And so you'd be hurting them in those roles, and you'd have to be really careful about how you do that so it maybe balances out and doesn't hurt them in those roles. It would be a balancing nightmare, and I don't know that it would change a whole lot for jungle either. If you say, okay, the role's strong, but your champions are so much weaker than other lanes and champions that you really have to be working with an advantage and a good numbers advantage in order to make things work. You can't just force so many situations to happen as a jungler. So there are things they could do like that, but again, very drastic, and I don't think the smartest idea. I think it would be very hard to balance all that out properly, and I don't really trust them to do that. So it's a difficult problem. You can see that when you go through almost any option with jungle, and of course they've tried many of these things over the years, which is how we know, it's just a conundrum where you hit jungle, and no matter what you do to hit jungle, they just gank more. And so what can Riot do, It's almost like the meta that we have now, to a certain extent, that does allow for kind of more free farming. It takes a decent amount of time to clear your camps, but not too much. You get your one gank for your 4 minute full clear, your 3 minute 50 or so full clear. I don't know. Maybe part of the issue is on the second clear, that on the first clear you have 6 camps and it takes a while. You only get that one gank in the first 4 or 5 minutes of the game. I feel like that's kind of okay. But I think on the second clear, only having 4 camps up means you have a tremendous amount of time before respawns then that second time to gank, a very long extended gank, or to do an objective even on your own, or to or to gank a lane and then gank another lane. It's just too much time that junglers have. And so maybe they need to have, I mean, we're thinking real out of the box here, but maybe they need to have like a different camp that spawns in place of blue buff and red buff when those are down, or blue buff and red buff, which are pretty weak anyways right now. Maybe their spawn time should be moved up more frequently so that every clear is that 6 camp clear, and like refreshing the buff duration or something like that. That could be good. So they need to do something really out of the box like that. But barring some things that frankly I just haven't thought of or haven't been tried yet, I don't really see how Riot can radically change jungle in a way that's not going to have some serious negative consequences for the rest of the game. So I think that the best thing Riot can do is make neutral objectives less impactful so that laners' ability in lane, right, and their leads that they're creating in lane are having more impact on the outcome of games rather than team fights around so many objectives, and so many important objectives. And that takes a little bit of agency and power and influence away from junglers as well, since they have an outsized influence and control over objectives. And maybe you could make the camps a little bit slower to take. Maybe you could make them take a little bit more damage, on their clears. That would help, especially sometimes, in the beginning of the game, it's pretty static how you're starting with full HP and whatnot. But like in the mid, part of the game, if you've gone for a gank or something like that, and then you go to your camps, maybe it makes that little bit of extra damage can be a break-even point sometimes where, before I would have been able to look for a second gank here, but now I'm too low, and so I need to just either do my camps and reset, or I could look for the second gank, but I'm not going to be able to do as many of my camps. So those are some, ways to go about it, but nothing's really a perfect solution. So I'm curious to hear what you guys think about how Riot could approach doing that, or whether you don't think that jungle is the most impactful role in the game or needs nerfed at all, because there's a lot of jungler players saying that. Surprise, surprise. We should talk a little bit about support too, because I feel like support is also obviously one of the most impactful roles in the game as well, right behind jungle. And again, I would put my order for the roles that I think should be most impactful is I really think AD carry should be number 1, mid lane should be number 2, top lane should be number 3, jungle number 4, and then support number 5. But we're kind of in opposite land, right? Like jungle is number 1, support's number 2, mid lane's number 3, top lane and AD carry are both pretty bad in terms of impact on the game, but I would argue, like, I guess it really depends, but maybe top lane I would put number 4 and then AD carry number 5. So I feel like we're pretty backwards from where we want to be in terms of impact that roles are having on the game. And so that's sort of the issue. Like, for one, Riot doesn't even believe that AD carry or other roles like that should have more impact on the outcome of games. They think that all roles should have an equal impact on the outcome of games, which I think is ridiculous. Like, you're not going to balance football or whatever so that the quarterback has as much impact as the linebacker or something like that. Like, I don't even know how you would accomplish that, right? In the same way that League has just evolved, and I don't know how we would accomplish making jungle that much weaker at this point, to be honest. So it just kind of is what it is. But for support specifically, there's some things that I've noticed about support that I think that they could do for sure. Again, like jungle, one of the reasons why support is the most impactful role in the game, and this is again coming from a support main, is that support, like jungle, has very high kill participation because they're able to move around the map. And again, it's about high quality kill participation. So, if a support like a Leona roams and facilitates a kill in mid or something like that, that just wouldn't have happened otherwise, that's obviously very impactful on the game. Whereas, a support who just throws a shield on somebody and gets an assist, it's not that big of a deal. So it's not just the statistic, it's more than the statistic, but the statistic provides a good overall measurement for, okay, these two roles are having the highest kill participation, which means in solo queue they're getting to have a big impact because their skill on their champion and their knowledge on the game and skill at the game is able to be shown and have a positive impact in more situations in all of their games because they're involved in more plays. So if you're involved in more plays, you're just going to have more of a positive impact if you're a good player and better than the average player in your rank, and you're going to climb easier and you're going to win more games and have a positive influence on your team because you're just allowed to be there without it costing you much. An AD carry and a top laner, it just costs too much to be at some of these plays. And so it's just not really possible for you to do that all the time. And in fact, a lot of influence that top lane had in terms of like the Grubs fights, and the Void Grubs fights and Rift Herald being impactful and stuff like that, a lot of that is stripped away now. So top lane's impact has probably gone down a little bit as well since, since a couple of days ago, since the start of the Ionia split, because now there's only that one Void Grub spawn. It's not as powerful, and Rift Herald isn't as good anymore. So for all of those reasons, I think that top lane's impact would have gone down a little bit. But to refocus on support, you have massive amount of kill participation, which can help carry those games in solo queue and stuff. But what do you lose when you go to roam, right? They're the least XP dependent champions and role in the game. So even if they were losing XP to roam, it wouldn't be that big of a deal. Well, here's the problem. Supports aren't even really losing XP when they go to roam because they're rewarded the same amount of XP if you're sitting in mid lane sapping XP. You're rewarded the same amount of XP as if you're sitting in bot lane with your AD carry. So a lot of times you're not losing XP. And even if you're sitting in the bush or behind the tower waiting for a play to happen, you're not punished for that time either because they've extended the XP range so far that you actually just get XP even when you're pretty far away from the minion wave and out of vision. You easily get XP while you're in fog, even right behind the minion wave. So you can be in fog and doing nothing and literally AFK waiting for an opportunity, and you're still getting rewarded with XP. So there's no opportunity cost there for going for a roam mid lane or something like that when you're picking up XP the whole time on your way to level 6. So supports you don't even really see, oh, this support roamed and so now they're behind like 2 or 3 levels anymore. You don't even really see that as much because it's like, actually the support that's roaming is getting just as much XP as the support who's not, because they're picking up XP in mid lane all the time. They're picking up XP from kills. If they get under leveled, they get even more XP from kills. And then that's not even to mention that the support item gives you more gold for hitting people than it does for last hitting minions. So if you really wanted to encourage supports to roam less and spend more time bot lane with their AD carry, you would make it so that the support item rewards you the same amount of gold for last hitting minions, or maybe even more, than you get for hitting people. But because you get rewarded so much for poking people, you're incentivized to roam and perma fight, and you actually stack your support item faster that way than you do by just playing bot lane and farming with your AD carry, which is what your AD carry wants. And it's what, a lot of people would like for support to be less impactful and for them to not get roamed on by the support for free all the time. You could also reduce the amount of XP that supports are getting when they're roaming to other lanes, either through reducing the range or even adding special mechanics so that supports are earning less XP when they're in another lane with somebody like that. Whatever the case may be, there's obviously ways that you could fix that. So you should probably make roaming more punishing for supports by reducing the amount of XP that they're able to obtain while they're roaming, reducing the amount of gold that they're earning from their support item while they're roaming. You can do that by, again, increasing the amount of gold you get from last hitting while you're farming, or reducing the amount that you get from last hitting, hitting people with the Spell Thieves passive. You could even disable the support item giving gold at all while you're, not straight up in bot lane. So they have a lot of options at their disposal. In fact, locking roles in like they've done with jungle and support can enable them. I think it makes the game a little bit overly complicated, but they can introduce new mechanics into the game that specifically target support XP or gold in the same way that, they can make supports get that starting item every single time, and people have to select their role specifically in champion select. So All of these things and tools are available to them now, and so we'll have to see what they do with them. Support items are also very, very strong in most cases. There are a couple of them that aren't great. And as I've been pointing out for years, there's like 8 to 10 enchanter support items, and there's 4 tank support items. The 4 tank support items are Locket, Knight's Vow, which are both pretty good. Zeke's, which is really only good at on certain champions. I consider it to be kind of bad in general, at least based on the math. And then Trailblazer, which is good on certain champions if you can get it as a first item and roam a lot with it, but is kind of unbuildable if you're not buying it right away. So, for those reasons, you've only really got on a lot of tank supports, even like 2 options out of the 4. And then on enchanter supports, you have, what used to be mythic items like Moonstone, Shirelias, Echoes of Helia. And then you've got your, regular like enchanter items, forbidden idol items like Redemption and Mikhail's, Ardent and Staff of Flowing Water. And then you've even got items like Imperial Mandate. And I don't know if they would consider it a support item, but you have like Malignance and stuff like that as well in the game. So if you count Malignance, I think it's 10 enchanter support items. If you don't, it's Imperial Mandate is clearly a support item. So it's still like 9 enchanter items or mage support items to 4 tank support items, which I think is a little bit ridiculous, obviously, since most people probably prefer to play tank supports in support. And certainly most people who, well, maybe that's not true, but actually I maybe that's a, high elo bias thing. Most support players in high elo obviously prefer to play engaged supports. There's a little bit of a gender disparity there between what people like to play, but obviously I think, and there's way more guys playing League, so it's hard to say, but I would say in general, tank supports tend to be more popular, yet there's half as many item options. And you've also got, what was I going to say here about this? I think that 80 carries and other people who are enjoying the game probably prefer tank supports and engaged supports over enchanters, is what I was going to say. So that's sort of the other kicker is like, do most 80 carries enjoy playing the game more with tank supports or with enchanters? And certain items there that are like underperforming or not doing well, they could look at buffing. And other ones, they should probably bring the power level down, because one of the reasons why support is so strong is because they can get 2, 3, 4 items in a way that they couldn't in years past. And that makes them really strong, especially when those items are extremely good and extremely gold efficient. And we're really lucky, and Riot's lucky, that people aren't building those items as much in other roles as they could. But believe me, these items are broken, and a lot of them are viable, on tanks or on junglers or top laners or whatever. And once they start doing that, it's going to be a disaster. So really, I think if you wanted to target support, I would focus on the items and the XP and the gold that supports are getting, because I just think that it's ridiculous. There need to be clear trade-offs for junglers for ganking versus farming, and there need to be clear trade-offs similarly for support with roaming versus getting gold and XP. And right now, supports are getting as much gold and XP more or less by roaming as they are from laning, and that's a problem. And then their items are extremely gold efficient with the gold that they do get. So let me know what you guys think. Are there any changes to jungle that I didn't think of that could solve it? Or is this just a new reality about the way that the modern game works that I should accept and that we should accept? Let me know what you guys think. With that being said, good luck in solo queue and have a wonderful day.